Hi, everybody. We're going to talk about introductions and conclusions right now. And they're basically, I want you to think of them as the bookends to your speech. So far, what we've talked about is pretty much how to build the meat of your speech. I always think you can think of the speech as like a sandwich, right? Whatever you put, if you're a vegetarian, maybe you put, I don't know, cheese and vegetables in your sandwich, whatever you put in the middle of the sandwich. And then the bookends are like the two pieces of bread, right? The sandwich, we talked about the meat or the cheese or the vegetables or whatever you want to put in that sandwich. Maybe it's peanut butter or jelly, okay? Then we're going to talk about the front, the top and the bottom, like the beginning and the end, the introduction, the conclusion, and that's what we're going to focus on right now. And I'm going to turn right into the PowerPoint. Let's go. Okay, there we are. Cool. Okay, here we are. Introductions and conclusions. So, what do we have in an introduction? We're going to go over each of these. Basically, these are all the parts in your introduction, and we're going to go over these individually in a little depth. And I want to talk about them because this is just as important as your body. Okay, an introduction is really important, but you don't want to do that until you know what you're going to talk about. And usually, if you've ever learned anything from writing an essay, sometimes the instructor will say, write the middle of your essay before you do the beginning and end, because you don't know. The introduction kind of narrows what you can talk about. So sometimes it's better to go to the meat of something, get the depth of it, the depth and breadth of it there, and then add the front end and the back end to something. Okay, so the introduction is the front end. The first thing you're going to do in an introduction is what we call to get the attention getter. Then following that, we do the thesis statement. After that, you need to establish your credibility. I'll talk more about what that means. You have to let the audience know what's in it for them. And then you need to give us a preview or an internal preview that moves us into the body of your speech. Now, let's talk about them individually. What is that attention getter? Attention getter is basically, just think about it, what it says. It's actually kind of self-explanatory. How are you going to get our attention? Now, the attention getter needs to be related to your speech. It can't be something completely offhand. I'll give you an example. So I had this student in a class, in a public speaking class. He was a great student. But one of the ways he tried to get our attention was he's giving a speech in front of the class, not online, was to step on a soda can. And he stepped on the soda can and made a loud noise, and it all got our attention, right? Hence attention getter. But he was not giving a speech on recycling. His speech topic wasn't even related to why he stepped on the can. It was just an attention getter. I don't want you to do that. That may be humorous, but it's not really appropriate. So what do I mean by attention getter? Let's look at some examples. You can make a provocative statement. Usually a provocative statement, the word provocative means to provoke. It's to provoke a response. So you say something, it can be what I call counterintuitive, like tell us something that we hadn't thought about or something that doesn't make sense but is true. Okay? But its idea is to provoke our interest, to make us be curious, or to feel something. It could be a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is a question that you ask, but you don't expect us to answer. So many students begin speeches with, how many of you, blah, 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 whatever it is. Honestly, avoid that. That's what I call amateurish, and you don't need to start your speech that way. You don't need to gauge your audience by asking how many people do that. Unless it's really relevant to your topic. In most cases, it's just your way of trying to get their attention, but you can find a different way. And by the way, when you start your speech, in this case, since you're doing it online, it would be good to know who you are. So you want to start to say what your name is. But when you launch into your speech, just launch right into it. Just start talking about, just as if in an essay, you just launch right into it, right? You don't give a lot of this preliminary stuff. You just want to launch right into your speech. Okay, you can begin with a quote, quoting someone, a quotation. Maybe it's a quote from a philosopher or a poet. You can start with a statistic. Maybe it's something like, we need to know how many people have died from texting and driving. Let's say your topic was texting and driving, and you start out off with a quote. How many people between the ages of 16 and 25 have died from texting and driving in Fresno County in the last year? Or maybe in the last 2 years, since most of us have been quarantined in place. Okay, personal anecdote, right? A personal anecdote is a brief story about yourself, right? You can start actually your beginning of your speech. You could start with a personal story and begin it and not finish it, and then end it with the rest of the personal story. Let's say you started a personal story and you didn't finish it, and then you went into the body of your speech, and then you came back to that personal story. There's a way that you can use it as bookends. You have to really work on that. Or you can just start with some kind of personal anecdote, just to engage us. People love storytelling. Okay, let's go back to that so you got that. So these are just some examples. They're not limited to this, but these are the usual examples. You could start, what if you had a short poem? I mean a short poem, not a long poem, but a short poem. You could start with a song lyric, right, which is like a poem. There are many ways you can do to engage. You could have started with audio, right? You could start with this. We could hear the sound of a song, or you're doing personal symbol speech right now. It could be the sound of birds. Let's say the cardinal was your totem bird or something, and so you started with the sound of birds. Anything that you could do that's brief that will get the attention of the audience. Thesis statement. This is basically you capturing the overall idea of the speech. You've been taught since high school, if not before then, what a thesis statement is. Excuse me. You all should know, right? You should be able to signal to your audience what that speech is about. We need to know. Don't make it a mystery. We want to know ahead of time, what is your speech about? Sometimes it's one sentence, but it can be two. It shouldn't be more than that. But we should know. So I'm telling you this in order, remember? You have the attention getter, then we know, what is the speech about? The next thing we want to know is, how are you connected to the speech, right? You're talking about the speech for a reason, and we want to know, what is that reason? Like, how are you connected? Is this your personal life experience? Obviously, this is a personal symbol speech, so you are going to be connected to it. But in what way are you connected? How is it important to you? How does it represent your life? Maybe it represents a period in your life. Maybe it represents a experience in your life. Maybe it represents a relationship in your life. Establish your connect with that topic. When we know you're connected to the topic, we're more likely to believe what you're saying, and it will support us in being interested in what you're talking about. Okay, so this is important. So far I've said you have to have an attention getter, and then you need to have your thesis statement, and then you need to establish your credibility. These, by the way, aren't negotiable. They're elements you need to have in your introduction. Okay, this is different ways that you can establish your connect with it, but we need to know, what's the deal about this topic? Why have you chosen this? Let's say you're going to do, when you do your topic about a social issue, and you decide homelessness is a social issue, I'm going to want to know, why did you pick this topic? Are you studying this? Do you plan to be a social worker for homeless people? Have you been homeless yourself? Have you known someone that's homeless? Like, what's your interest in this topic? Usually we pick things to research. We have a personal connect to it. It's the same way when I talked about wolves, right? I always talk about the fact that I had a dog that was part wolf. That makes me more believable in my knowledge about wolves, since I'm not a scientist. Okay. What's in it for them? What does this mean? What's in it for them means, How are you going to let the audience know what it is they should, should they care about this speech, right? What's in it for them? It's a WIIFT. Sounds silly, but you need to not just create your connect to the topic, but you need to get the audience, like, why should they care about this topic? Why should they be listening to you? Oftentimes this involves letting them know what it is, what are they going to receive from the speech. Sometimes it's the easiest saying, when you're done listening to my speech, you will have gained a great understanding about homelessness or about the problem of drug abuse, or you'll be a greater understanding of my personal symbol is the sunflower. You'll have a greater understanding of the various meanings of a sunflower. And the next time you see a sunflower, you won't look at it the same way. That's what it means. What's in it for them? What will they gain by listening from your speech? Gain from listening to your speech. Okay, preview. This part, you got to preview what it is you're going to talk about. So what we talked about, those 3 main points, this is where you're going to preview those main points. So you started out with your attention getter. You gave us a thesis statement. Then you establish your credibility. You let us know, you let the audience know what's in it for them. And now you're going to preview your 3 main points. Where are you going with this speech? All of this needs to be in the introduction. We need to know what it is we're going to be hearing. How are you going to describe a sunflower? In what way? If I go back to that, the example I gave you of sunflower, how are we going to understand what the sunflower is? I believe I talked about it as a weed and a flower, as a source of protein, and that's a symbol for happiness. Okay, so I would just say that. That would be my preview into the speech. Important, we need to know this. It signals where we're going. A reminder that we don't know where you're going. We don't have the speech in front of us. We are depending upon you in that introduction to provide those 5 things so that we know where you're going in the speech. It's dependent upon our listening. That's why repetition in speech is so important. So you're gonna preview those 3 points, and then we're gonna hear those main points again because you're gonna talk about them, right? So if I talk about the sunflower as a symbol of happiness, a weed and a flower, and it wasn't in that order. It was first weed and the flower as a weed and a flower, and I would have to explain to you why it's a weed and why it's a flower. As a source of protein, so we eat it, and birds eat it. And maybe even, I could even expand that if I were to think about it, as it's a source of food. Maybe I would not take it as a source of protein. Maybe I'd say it's a source of food for both humans, birds, and bees. Okay. And then the third point would be it's a symbol for happiness. So I'd say all of those things in this preview before I launched into the body of my speech. Then you'd hear that again. There we go. Okay. Now, we're going to stop there, and I'm going to go on to another recording. We're going to talk about conclusions.